The tires of the rented sedan hummed a low, monotonous dirge against the asphalt, a sound that had become the soundtrack to our new, horrifying reality. We had been driving for hours, or perhaps it was days. Time had lost all meaning in the vacuum of the desert night. The Obsidian Peaks Resort was a hellish glow extinguished over the horizon, but its specter filled the car, a presence more tangible than the leather seats or the cold blast of the air conditioning. Leo drove with a rigid, unnerving precision, his hands at 10 and 2, his eyes constantly scanning. The road ahead, the rearview mirror, the side mirrors, the empty, star-strewn sky. He was no longer the man I had argued with over scallops and silence. That man, I was beginning to understand, had been a carefully constructed fiction. The man beside me now was a raw nerve, a creature of pure survival instinct, his every sense tuned to a frequency of paranoia and threat I could not hear. The silence between us was no longer empty. It was dense, heavy, and loaded with everything we could not say. I sat curled against the passenger door, my body aching with a fatigue that was more soul-deep than physical. I stared out the window, but the majestic desert landscape was invisible to me. All I could see were the phantom flames against the backs of my eyelids every time I blinked. The roar of the fire had been replaced by the roar of the wind and the engine, but the screams, the ones I imagined, the ones I knew must have happened, echoed in my mind. The weight of their lives, snuffed out because of the man next to me, was a crushing gravity pressing me into my seat. My mind replayed the confession on the roadside. Kreshnik, a debt, a final meeting, an example. The words were simple, but their implications were vast and terrifying. They sketched the outline of a life I had never known, a shadow existence running parallel to our own. Our beautiful home, my jewelry, this very trip. It had all been funded by a darkness I had been blissfully, willfully ignorant of. I felt a fool, a decorated doll in a gilded cage, now suddenly freed by the very fire that had destroyed it, only to find myself in a different, more terrifying kind of prison. A moving one. I dared a glance at Leo. The dashboard lights cast his profile in a sickly green pallor. The charming, sometimes arrogant, often distant lawyer was gone. In his place was a stranger with hollow cheeks and eyes that held a terrifying, flat emptiness. He had shed his suit jacket and tie during our frantic escape. His expensive dress shirt was wrinkled and stained with sweat at the collar. He looked less like a corporate professional and more like a man on the edge of everything. He must have felt my gaze. His eyes flicked from the road to me for a fraction of a second. There was no apology in them, no remorse, only a sharp, assessing look as if checking to see if I was still a liability, if I was holding together enough to not jeopardize whatever insane plan was forming in his head. "We need to cross," he said suddenly, his voice rough from disuse and the desert air. It was the first thing he'd said in an hour, and it made me jump. "Cross," I echoed, my own voice a dry croak. "The border," he clarified, his eyes back on the road. "They'll be looking for us domestically, checking flights, trains. My credit cards are already burning. This is the only way. The word hung in the air. It no longer just meant Kreshnik and his associates. It meant the authorities. The police. The FBI. We weren't just running from the killers, we were running from the law. We were fugitives. The sheer magnitude of it was paralyzing. My life, my identity, my sense of right and wrong, it had all been vaporized in that fire. I was no longer Elena Sterling, wife of a successful lawyer. I was a woman in a silk dress and hotel slippers, fleeing a mass murder, her fate entirely in the hands of a man she realized she had never known. The headlights illuminated a road sign, its reflective surface blazing in the darkness. It listed distances to towns I'd never heard of. And at the bottom, it simply stated, "International border, 82 miles. 82 miles. That was all that stood between us and, what? Freedom? Or a deeper, more inescapable level of hell?" Leo pressed down on the accelerator, the engine responding with a low growl. The hum of the tires grew louder, the only sound in the heavy, suffocating silence as we raced toward the first barrier of our unknown future, carrying the unbearable weight of our past like a bomb in the trunk. The 82 miles bled away under the tires, each one a mile deeper into a nightmare I couldn't wake from. The desert began to show signs of reluctant civilization. A lone truck stop, its lights a blurry oasis. A faded billboard advertising a casino. The occasional set of headlights passing in the opposite direction, each one making Leo's knuckles whiten on the steering wheel. The sky in the east began to lighten from black to a deep, bruised purple, rendering the landscape in stark, gloomy relief. Our night of terror was giving way to a grim dawn. And then I saw it. A constellation of harsh, white lights ahead, arranged in orderly rows, cutting through the pre-dawn gloom. It was a complex of low, official-looking buildings flanked by multiple lanes of traffic funneling into a series of covered booths. The border crossing. It looked less like a gateway to another country and more like a surgical incision into the landscape, a place of scrutiny and control. My heart, which had settled into a numb, terrified rhythm, began to hammer against my ribs. This was it. The first test. I instinctively reached for my purse on the floor, my fingers fumbling for the small, blue booklet inside. My passport, a symbol of my identity, of my citizenship, of the normal life that now felt like a dream belonging to someone else. "What are you doing?" Leo's voice was a low, sharp crack in the silence. "My passport," I said, my voice trembling. "They'll ask for it." "Put it away," he commanded, his eyes never leaving the road as he merged into the rightmost lane, choosing a booth with a shorter queue. Only 2 cars ahead of us. "Leo, we need it to cross," I insisted, a spike of panic piercing my numbness. "We can't just." "Elena," he cut me off, his tone leaving no room for argument. It was the voice he used in court, the voice that brooked no dissent. It was cold, absolute, and it terrified me. "Do not reach for it. Do not offer it. Let me handle this." Handle what? How could he handle a border crossing without documentation? My mind raced with terrifying possibilities. Fake passports? Were they in the glove box? Had he planned this far ahead? The man's capacity for secrets seemed bottomless. The car in front of us moved forward. We were next. The stark white lights of the booth flooded our car, erasing the shadows, exposing us. I felt utterly naked. I could see the officer inside clearly now, a woman with a severe ponytail and a crisp uniform, her face illuminated by the glow of a computer monitor. She looked tired, bored, and utterly authoritative. Leo rolled the car forward and came to a smooth stop, his window already descending. The cool morning air, smelling of diesel and concrete, washed into the car. The officer leaned out slightly, her eyes scanning our faces, then the interior of the car, in one practiced sweeping motion. "Morning," she said, her voice flat and devoid of warmth. Citizenship. This was it. The moment. My throat went dry. My passport felt like a burning coal in my purse. Every fiber of my law-abiding being screamed to hand it over, to prove I was innocent, to comply. Leo offered a smile that didn't reach his eyes. It was a professional, polite mask. "United States," he said, his voice calm, steady. The perfect picture of a man with nothing to hide. The officer's eyes shifted to me. Her gaze was impersonal, routine, but it felt like an interrogation. "And you, ma'am?" I opened my mouth. A small, nervous sound, a precursor to speech, escaped my lips. My hand twitched toward my purse on the floor, and that's when I felt it. Leo's hand, which had been resting on the center console, moved almost imperceptibly. His fingers didn't grab me. They didn't need to. They pressed down on my knee, a brief, hidden, and intensely forceful warning. His head turned just a fraction of an inch toward me, his body blocking the gesture from the officer's view. His lips barely moved, the words a breath of air, a ghost of sound meant for my ears alone. "Don't answer." The words were so soft, so utterly insane, that my brain refused to process them at first. Don't answer? Don't answer a direct question from a federal officer at an international border? It was unthinkable. It was a one-way ticket to being pulled aside, searched, interrogated. I froze, my mouth still half open, my entire body seizing up with a new, more profound level of terror. The world narrowed to the officer's impatient face, the hum of the idling engine, and the crushing weight of my husband's impossible, terrifying command. The first barrier wasn't just the booth ahead of us. It was the chasm of trust and fear that had just exploded between our two front seats. The world stopped. The low hum of the engine, the distant rumble of other vehicles, the cool morning air. It all receded into a muffled, indistinct haze. The only things that existed were the three of us. The impatient border officer, my husband with his chilling, impossible command hanging in the air, and me, trapped between them, my heart performing a frantic, painful tap dance against my ribs. Don't answer. The two words echoed in the silent chamber of my mind, a paradox so profound it short-circuited every instinct I possessed. My entire life had been built on a foundation of compliance, of following rules, of being the good girl, the good student, the good wife. When an authority figure asked a question, you answered. It was the social contract. It was what kept the world orderly and safe. To not answer was not just rude. It was unthinkable, a fundamental tearing of the fabric of reality. The officer's eyebrows, which had been slightly raised in expectation, now began to lower into a faint frown. The bored impatience on her face was curdling into suspicion. The silence stretched, a taut wire threatening to snap. My mouth was still agape, a frozen monument to my aborted response. I could feel the heat of a blush creeping up my neck, a traitorous signal of guilt. My hand, which had been moving toward my purse, was frozen in midair, a clear tell of interrupted intention. Leo, meanwhile, was a statue of calm. His press on my knee was gone, his hand back on the steering wheel as if nothing had happened. He kept his gaze fixed on the officer, his expression one of polite, slightly apologetic expectation, as if he were waiting for her to finish a thought. "Ma'am," the officer repeated, her voice sharper now, laced with a new, professional edge. "I asked for your citizenship." Her eyes, now narrowed, darted from my frozen face to Leo's composed one, then into the back seat, scanning for what? Hidden passengers? Contraband? The reason for this bizarre hesitation. My mind raced through the consequences of obedience. If I listened to him, we would be pulled aside immediately. They would separate us. They would search the car. They would find nothing because we had nothing, but the delay would be catastrophic. It would give time for them, for Kreshnik, for the law to catch up. Leo's paranoia, I realized, wasn't just paranoia. It was a calculated assessment of our odds. Compliance meant capture. But what did defiance mean? The other option, to obey Leo, to stay silent, was a leap into a terrifying abyss. It was an act of rebellion against everything I knew. It was to willingly become the fugitive he already was. It was to trust him, the architect of this entire nightmare, with my life and my freedom in a way I had never trusted anyone. His whisper wasn't just an instruction. It was a demand for absolute faith at the exact moment I had none left. It was a test. I saw the officer's hand move slightly below the lip of her booth, likely toward a button. A silent alarm. A call for backup. We had seconds. I made a choice, not out of trust, but out of a sheer, survivalist terror that his calculation of the danger was better than mine. I closed my mouth. I let my hand fall from its aborted journey to my purse and rest limply in my lap. I dropped my gaze from the officers, staring at my knees, adopting a posture of meek, flustered confusion. I said nothing. The silence that followed was louder than any scream. It was a void I had willingly stepped into. I had crossed my own personal border, from a world of rules into a world where my husband's whispered words held more power than the authority of a nation. The woman I had been an hour ago would have been appalled. The woman I was now just felt cold, empty, and utterly, terrifyingly alone, even sitting inches from the man who had just claimed total control over my fate. The echo of his whisper was now the only law I could follow. The silence in the wake of my non-answer was a physical force, thick and electric. It was broken only by the impatient click-click-click of the officer's pen against the edge of her booth. The sound was like a tiny metronome counting down the seconds to our undoing. Her eyes, now hard and fully alert, were locked on me. The bored civility was gone, completely stripped away. "Ma'am," she said, her voice a low, deliberate blade, "I need you to answer the question. What is your country of citizenship?" I kept my eyes downcast, focused on a loose thread on the hem of my dress. I could feel the weight of her stare, the heat of her growing suspicion. My heart was a frantic bird beating against the cage of my ribs. Every muscle in my body was tensed, screaming at me to look up, to apologize, to explain, to comply. I held my breath, playing the only part one could. A flustered, perhaps simple, woman who was overwhelmed by the authority of the moment. It was Leo who broke the standoff, not with a confession, but with a masterful performance of concerned exasperation. He let out a soft, weary sigh, the sound of a man dealing with a familiar, minor inconvenience. "Officer, I apologize," he said, his voice a smooth, placating baritone. He leaned slightly toward the window, adopting a confidential tone. "It's my fault. We've been driving all night. My wife, she suffers from severe migraines, triggers like stress, lack of sleep, and these bright lights." He gestured vaguely toward the harsh halogens flooding the car. "She's not being difficult, I promise. She's somewhere else right now. The medication she takes makes her terribly disoriented." He delivered the lie with such effortless conviction that for a split second, I almost believed it myself. The concern in his voice was perfect, layered with a touch of embarrassed husband. It was a brilliant, disgusting gambit. The officer's eyes flicked from my bowed head to Leo's earnest face. The suspicion didn't vanish, but it was now mingled with a sliver of professional doubt. A medical issue was a plausible, non-criminal explanation for bizarre behavior. She was trained to spot threats, not diagnose neurological conditions. "She's unable to verbally confirm her citizenship?" the officer asked, her tone skeptical but now procedural. She was following a new branch in her mental flowchart. "I can confirm for both of us," Leo said, his voice dripping with reason and cooperation. "We are both United States citizens. Our passports are right here." He moved slowly, deliberately, keeping his hands in her sight. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket, the same jacket he'd worn to our disastrous dinner, and pulled out 2 small blue booklets. My passport. He had my passport. He must have taken it from my purse when I was sleeping or distracted. The violation was so intimate, so calculated, it stole the air from my lungs. He had never intended for me to speak. He had planned for this exact scenario, controlling every variable, including me. He handed both passports over with a polite, almost apologetic smile. The officer took them, her eyes still narrowed. She looked from the photos to our faces, her gaze lingering on me. I forced myself to look up, to meet her eyes for a fleeting second, mustering what I hoped was a pained, medicated glaze before letting my gaze drift weakly away. The moment stretched into an eternity as she scanned the passports, her eyes glued to the screen of her computer. I could feel the thrum of the database connecting, our names, our lives being called up for inspection. I waited for the alarm, literal or figurative. I waited for her to see a flag, a warning, a bulletin that had been issued in the hours since the fire. Leo didn't wait. He kept talking, a steady, calm stream of noise designed to control the narrative. "We're just heading down for a short trip to break up the drive. She just needs to lie down in a dark room for a few hours. We booked a place just on the other side." He was providing answers to questions she hadn't asked yet, filling the silence with harmless, mundane details. It was a psychological tactic, overwhelming her with normality. The officer finally looked up from her screen. She handed the passports back to Leo, her expression unreadable. The system had cleared us. For now, we were just 2 tired Americans, one of whom had a headache. "Very well," she said, her voice still cool. She gave me one last, long, appraising look. It was a look that said she didn't quite believe it, but she had no legal reason to hold us. "You're clear. Proceed." She hit a button, and the red light above our lane switched to green. "Thank you, officer." "Appreciate your understanding," Leo said, his voice dripping with a gratitude that felt like acid. He didn't waste a second. He put the car into drive and eased forward, smooth and controlled, not too fast, not too slow. The perfect picture of a relieved man just wanting to get his sick wife to a hotel. We drove out from under the harsh lights of the booth, leaving the officer and the sovereign territory of the United States behind us. We had crossed. But as we rolled into the foreign darkness, the only thing I felt was the chilling certainty that the man beside me was a more skilled and dangerous liar than I could have ever imagined. The standoff was over. He had won, and I was more his prisoner than ever before. The green light was a reprieve I didn't trust. Every nerve in my body remained wound-tight, expecting a shout, a siren, the roar of a pursuit vehicle. But there was only the quiet hum of the engine as we rolled forward, leaving the stark white lights of the booth behind us. We were on the other side. The asphalt looked the same. The desert air smelled the same. But everything was different. We had traveled maybe 50 yards into the foreign territory when a new set of lights flared to life ahead. Not the overhead halogens of the crossing, but the flashing red and blue of police vehicles. 2 squad cars were parked at a diagonal, partially blocking the road, creating a mandatory checkpoint just beyond the primary border authority. A handful of officers in a different, darker uniform stood outside their vehicles, their postures alert, their eyes scanning each car that filtered through the narrowed lane. My heart, which had begun to slow its frantic pace, seized up again. This was it. This was where the real trap was sprung. The first officer's doubt had triggered a secondary screening. Leo's lie had only bought us a few seconds. Leo's reaction was instantaneous and devoid of panic. It was a cold, tactical assessment. His foot, which had been easing onto the accelerator, lifted. He didn't slam the brakes. He simply let the car coast forward, slowing our progress to a crawl as we approached the end of the short queue for the secondary stop. "Leo," I whispered, the word a strangled plea. What was the plan now? Another lie? A different illness? He didn't look at me. His eyes were fixed on the officers ahead, then flicking to the rearview mirror, then to the side. He was calculating, measuring distances, looking for an out. There was none. High, barbed wire fences lined the road on both sides. We were in a funnel. The car in front of us was waved through after a brief conversation. It was our turn. An officer with a flashlight gestured for us to approach his window. Leo didn't. In one fluid, shocking motion, he threw the car into reverse. The transmission whined in protest. He didn't gun it. He backed up with a steady, determined pressure on the accelerator, moving against the flow of the newly arriving traffic funneling into the checkpoint. Horns blared behind us. A truck that had just been cleared through the primary booth swerved to avoid us, its driver laying on the horn and shouting obscenities out his window. Chaos erupted. The officers at the secondary checkpoint snapped to attention. Shouts echoed over the sound of the horns. One officer started jogging toward us, his hand raised, palm out, signaling us to stop. Another reached for the radio on his shoulder. Leo ignored it all. His face was a mask of intense concentration. He kept backing up, his head swiveling between the rearview mirror and the side mirrors, navigating backwards through the chaotic lane we had just left. "What are you doing?" I screamed, gripping the dashboard. My body braced for impact. He didn't answer. His focus was absolute. He cleared the primary booth area, the stunned face of the female officer flashing past my window, her mouth open in shock. He kept going, reversing back the way we had come, back toward the United States. An alarm began to blare. A different, more urgent sound than the traffic noise. A siren hooped behind us. In the side mirror, I saw one of the squad cars from the secondary checkpoint lurch forward, its light bar spinning, beginning a clumsy three-point turn to give chase. We were fleeing a border crossing. In reverse. It was insane. It was suicidal. And it was our only option. Leo finally slammed the brakes, jerking the car to a stop just before the USA side of the crossing demarcation. He threw the shift back into drive, and with a roar of the engine, he wrenched the steering wheel hard to the right. The tires squealed as he shot onto a narrow, unmarked access road that ran parallel to the main highway, used by maintenance vehicles. It was a desperate, brutal maneuver that rocked the car on its suspension. He accelerated down the rough gravel road, kicking up a plume of dust that glittered in the dawn light. In the rearview mirror, I saw the pursuing squad car skid to a halt at the mouth of the access road, blocked by a closed gate we had somehow already passed. We were off the grid. For now. He drove fast, the car bouncing violently on the rutted track. We were running away from the border, not toward it. The plan had collapsed. The only thing that mattered was the flashing red and blue lights fading in our dust-filled wake and the certain knowledge that every law enforcement officer for 100 miles was now actively looking for us. The border was no longer an escape route. It was a sealed door and we were on the wrong side of it, trapped. Leo didn't stop until the plume of dust behind us threatened to become a beacon, and the access road began to curve, putting a low rise between us and the main highway. He swerved the car off the track, bumping and lurching through the scrub until we were partially concealed behind a rocky outcropping. He killed the engine. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the ticking of the cooling engine and the ragged sound of my own breathing. The adrenaline that had fueled the insane reverse flight was receding, leaving a cold, trembling void in its place. I could still see the spinning lights, hear the blare of the horns, feel the car moving backward against the flow of everything sane and normal. I turned on him, the fear finally boiling over into a scalding, hysterical anger. "What was that?" I shrieked, my voice cracking in the confined space. "Are you insane? We were through. We were through and you turned around. You fled from police. We're fugitives. They're going to be everywhere now. They have our names. They have our passports." I was unraveling, the last threads of my composure snapping. The image of those flashing lights was burned into my vision. We were hunted animals. Leo didn't react to my outburst. He was staring straight ahead through the windshield, his hands still gripping the wheel, his knuckles white. His breathing was even controlled. The panic I felt was entirely my own. He had entered a state of cold, post-mission clarity. "They weren't there for a random check, Elena," he said, his voice quiet, eerily calm. He finally released the wheel and turned to look at me. The dawn light filtering through the dusty windshield illuminated the grim certainty in his eyes. "What are you talking about? Of course they were. It's a border. They have checkpoints." He shook his head slowly, a gesture of absolute finality. "No, that was a net, and we were the fish they were waiting for." I stared at him, uncomprehending. How? How could they know? How could they possibly know we'd be at that specific crossing at the specific time? "That's the wrong question," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, as if the rocks themselves might be listening. "The question isn't how they knew we'd be there. The question is how Kreshnik knew which crossing we'd use." The name landed like a physical blow in the quiet car. "The man from the bar. The architect of the fire." Leo continued, his words methodical, picking apart the horror with a lawyer's precision. "He has contacts. Everywhere. He knew I'd run. He knows how I think. He knows I'm pragmatic, that I'd choose the closest, most logical crossing. He didn't need to chase us. He just needed to make a phone call, to tell his friends on this side of the line to keep an eye out for a man and a woman in a rental car, probably looking stressed, probably trying to cross at dawn. He let that sink in. The secondary checkpoint wasn't a random security measure. It was a welcome party. He wasn't trying to have us arrested. "Elena?" Leo said, the truth dawning in his own eyes as he spoke it, as if he were only now fully realizing the depth of the trap. He was trying to have us delivered. Those weren't just cops back there. They were a transaction. We get pulled into secondary screening, our passports get confiscated for further verification. We get put in a holding room, and we never come out. We just disappear into the system. His system. The reality of it was so much worse than I had imagined. We weren't just running from the law. We were running from a shadowy network that had tendrils coiled around the law itself. The border wasn't a line between safety and danger. It was a marketplace, and we were the merchandise. Leo's next words were the most chilling of all, spoken with a hollow, devastating realization. They aren't just looking for us, Elena. They're looking at us. They have our pictures. They have our descriptions. They're watching every airport, every train station, every major road, and every border crossing. My face. Your face. They're already in the system. He looked at me, and for the first time I saw a crack in his icy armor. It wasn't fear for himself. It was a horrifying, dawning guilt. I didn't just put you in danger, he whispered, his voice raw. I painted a target on your back. And now the whole world is looking at it. The confession hung in the dusty air of the car. The anger drained out of me, replaced by a cold, soul-deep terror. The flashing lights weren't a symbol of capture. They were a symbol of a much darker fate, vanishing into the machinery of a threat we couldn't see or fight. We were utterly alone, and every institution that was supposed to protect us had potentially been turned against us. The world had become a hostile landscape, and every pair of eyes was a potential enemy. The truth of our situation settled over the car like a shroud. We were trapped. Every official pathway was sealed, every modern convenience of travel a potential snare. The rental car was a ticking time bomb, its GPS a beacon for anyone with the right access. Our names, our faces, were now digital ghosts haunting every law enforcement and surveillance system. The world had shrunk to the dusty interior of this vehicle, parked illegally in the scrubland, with the sun now cresting the horizon, turning the desert into a vast, exposed oven. Leo sat motionless for a long minute, his eyes closed, thinking. I could almost hear the whirring of his mind, discarding one impossible option after another. The confident lawyer was gone. The panicked fugitive was receding. In his place was a raw strategist, a cornered animal assessing its only remaining, desperate moves. He opened his eyes. There was no fear in them now, only a bleak, terrifying resolve. We can't use the car, he stated, his voice flat. We can't use any crossing. We can't go to a town. We can't use phones, ATMs, or credit cards. He was systematically burning every bridge to the normal world. Everything that connects us to who we were is a weapon they can use. He turned to me, his gaze intense. There's only one way. We go where there is no line. We go through the desert. The statement was so insane, so utterly primitive, that I laughed. It was a short, sharp, hysterical sound. Through the desert? Leo, we have no water. We're wearing... I gestured helplessly at my silk dress and hotel slippers, at his wrinkled dress shirt and trousers. We'll die out there. We'll die if we stay here, he countered, his voice leaving no room for argument. This isn't a hike, Elena. It's a calculated risk. A few miles, maybe 5. There's a town on the other side. Not a big one. A place off the grid. We get there, we find a way to get new clothes, some supplies. We disappear. How do you know this? I asked, the question a whisper. How do you know where to go? A shadow passed over his face. You plan for contingencies, he said evasively. It was all he would offer. The man had escape routes mapped out. This was a contingency he'd planned for. The realization was as chilling as the plan itself. He got out of the car, opening the trunk. I followed on unsteady legs, the rough gravel sharp through my thin slippers. The morning heat was already building. He wasn't gathering supplies. There were none. He was wiping down the interior with the hem of his shirt, erasing fingerprints. He popped the license plates off, bending them and hurling them in opposite directions into the scrub. He found a rag in the trunk, used it to open the gas cap, and then shoved the rag into the tank's opening. He didn't light it. A car fire would be a beacon, he explained, answering my unspoken question. An abandoned car with the plates missing and the gas siphoned. It'll look like a simple theft. It might buy us a few more hours before they connect it to us. It was ruthless, efficient, and terrifying. He was thinking like a criminal because I realized with a jolt that was what he was, what he had been long before the fire. He turned to me. We take nothing. Your purse, my wallet, our phones. It all stays here. He pointed to a specific point on the horizon where a distant, jagged line of hills broke the flat expanse. We head for that notch. We walk in a straight line. We don't stop. The finality of it was absolute. We were abandoning the last vestiges of our former lives in this rented car. We were stepping out of the 21st century and into a brutal, ancient struggle for survival. I looked back at the car, our metal lifeline, now rendered a useless, dangerous hunk of scrap. I looked at the vast, unforgiving desert ahead. The scale of the undertaking was monstrous. Leo was already walking, not waiting for my agreement. His figure, in his ridiculous city clothes, looked small and vulnerable against the immense landscape. He was committing us to this. My choice was simple. Follow him into the barren unknown, or stay behind and wait for the men in the flashing cars to find me. With a heart heavier than I thought possible, I took a step away from the car. Then another. My flimsy slippers slipped on the gravel. I bent down, ripped them off, and threw them back toward the car. The ground was already warm, rough with stones and spiny plants. I took a deep breath of the heating air, and I followed my husband into the emptiness. We were no longer on the run. We were escaping into a void, crossing a line that existed only on a map, leaving everything we were behind in the dust. The first 100 yards were a shock to the system. The desert floor, which had looked smooth from the car, was a treacherous carpet of loose shale, ankle-twisting crevices, and plants that seemed designed to inflict pain. Every step was a calculated risk. The thin silk of my dress snagged on thorny ocotillo, tearing with a sound that was absurdly loud in the immense silence. My bare feet, soft from a lifetime of carpets and shoes, were already protesting, tenderized by the hot, unforgiving ground. Leo moved with a grim, determined purpose, his city shoes scuffing and slipping on the gravel. He didn't speak. He just walked, his head constantly on a swivel, scanning the horizon, the sky, the empty expanse behind us. He wasn't just navigating, he was on patrol. The sun, now fully clear of the horizon, began its relentless assault. There was no shade. There was only the baking, white-blue sky and the hard, reflective earth, working in concert to cook us alive. The heat was a physical presence. It pressed down from above and radiated up from below, leaching the moisture from my body with terrifying speed. My mouth felt full of cotton. My skin, slick with a thin layer of sweat that evaporated instantly, was already starting to feel tight, parchment dry. I focused on Leo's back, on placing one foot in front of the other, on the distant notch in the hills that never seemed to get any closer. The geography was our enemy. It was a sadist, meting out punishment with every step. But as the hours bled together in a haze of thirst and exhaustion, I began to understand it was also, perversely, our only accomplice. Its vast, featureless nature hid us. There were no roads out here, no trails. No one would think to look for us in this wasteland. The very harshness that was threatening to kill us was also our shield. The emptiness that amplified our vulnerability also swallowed us whole, making us invisible. We were two tiny, insignificant specks in a great brown ocean. The desert didn't care about our crimes, our past, our dying marriage. It would either let us pass or it would kill us, and its indifference was the only form of mercy we could expect. My feet were a mess. I could feel blisters forming and bursting, the raw skin grating against the sand and rock. A sharp thorn pierced the sole of my foot, and I gasped, stumbling to a halt. A hot, sharp pain lanced up my leg. Leo stopped and turned. For a moment, I saw a flicker of impatience, the old Leo who hated delays and inefficiency. But it was quickly extinguished by the new reality. He walked back to me, his own steps labored. He didn't have a medical kit. He didn't have water to clean it. Wordlessly, he ripped a strip of fabric from the tail of his already ruined dress shirt. He knelt, a gesture that should have been chivalrous but felt only desperate, and wrapped the cleanish cloth around my foot, tying it tightly. It was a futile gesture, but it was all there was. Not much farther, he lied, his voice a dry croak. He wasn't looking at the hills. He was looking at my face, at the despair he saw there. The notch was still a lifetime away. We kept walking. The silence was broken only by our ragged breathing and the crunch of our footsteps. There were no birds, no insects, no sound of life at all. It was a dead world, and we were ghosts moving through it. My mind began to play tricks. I saw mirages of cool, blue lakes shimmering in the distance. I thought I heard the sound of car engines, of sirens, only to realize it was the blood rushing in my ears. The line between reality and delirium began to blur. I was no longer Elena Sterling, jilted wife. I was a collection of thirst and pain, moving on autopilot toward a destination that might not even exist. Leo's pace had slowed. His confident stride had become a shuffling trudge. The desert was breaking him down, too. The sophisticated lawyer was being stripped away, layer by layer, by the sun and the rock, leaving behind the raw, primal core of a man fighting to survive. We were no longer a husband and wife. We were two animals, bound together by a shared fate, using the harsh, indifferent landscape as both our prison and our only hope of salvation. Every painful step was a bargain with the desert itself. We endured its brutality, and in return, it hid us from a world that wanted us dead. The notch in the hills, a mere smudge on the horizon for hours, slowly resolved into a defined pass. Each step was an agony of will, a negotiation between the screaming protest of my body and the silent, desperate command to move forward. The makeshift bandage on my foot was stained dark with dirt and blood, and every rock felt like a hot coal. Leo's breathing was a ragged sawing sound. His once crisp shirt now a damp, filthy rag plastered to his back. The desert had humbled us, beaten us down to our most primitive selves. We reached the base of the final climb, a steep, scree-filled incline leading up to the pass. It looked impossible. Leo turned, his face gaunt, his eyes sunken in deep shadows. He didn't speak. He simply held out his hand. It wasn't a romantic gesture. It was a practical one. Pact. We would need to pull each other up this last, cruel hurdle. I looked at his outstretched hand, the hand that had signed deals, held a wedding ring, and whispered a command that had sealed our fate. After a moment's hesitation, I took it. His grip was strong, but his skin was as dry and hot as the rock around us. The climb was a blur of sliding gravel, strained muscles, and gasped breaths. We moved as a single, clumsy, four-legged creature, scrambling, slipping, and hauling each other upward. The world shrank to the next handhold, the next foothold. There was no past, no future, only the brutal, immediate present. And then, suddenly, the ground leveled out. We stumbled forward a few steps and collapsed onto the flat stone of the pass, our chests heaving, too exhausted to even speak. I pushed myself up onto my elbows, and the world fell away. On the other side, the landscape was different. The harsh, open desert gave way to a shallow, greener valley. A ribbon of asphalt, a small secondary road snaked through it, and nestled alongside it, maybe a mile distant, was a town. It wasn't much. A cluster of low buildings, a gas station, a few houses. But it was life. It was civilization. A sob escaped my cracked lips. It was a sound of pure, unadulterated relief, so powerful it shook my entire body. We had made it. We had crossed. Leo sat up beside me, following my gaze. There was no triumph on his face. No relief. Only a weary, hollow assessment. "There," he said, his voice a rough whisper. He pointed a trembling finger toward the outskirts of the town. "The gas station. We need everything." The reality of our freedom came crashing down. We had survived the desert, but we were now too bedraggled, half-dead people in torn, filthy formal wear, with no money, no ID, and no way to explain our presence. The town wasn't a sanctuary. It was the next obstacle course. The relief curdled into a new kind of anxiety. How do we get water? Food? Clothes? Do we beg? Do we steal? The morality that had governed my entire life had been burned away in the hotel fire and baked out of me in the desert sun. Now only need remained. We began the painful descent, our bodies protesting every movement. The sight of the town made the distance feel both infinitesimal and infinite. We were free from the immediate natural threat of exposure and thirst. But we were stepping into a human world where we were aliens, fugitives, freaks. We reached the edge of the road and hesitated, crouching in the scrub like animals. A beat-up pickup truck rattled past, its driver not even glancing our way. The normalcy of it was surreal. "Wait here," Leo commanded, his old authority returning, though it was frayed at the edges. He left me hiding behind a thorny bush and walked, with a pathetic attempt at casualness, toward the back of the small, dusty gas station. I watched him, my heart thudding. Was he going to rob it? Was he going to try to talk his way into something? The man was a stranger capable of anything. He disappeared around the back. Minutes stretched into an eternity. Every sound made me jump. Then I saw him reappear. He wasn't empty-handed. He was carrying a bundled-up plastic grocery bag. His walk was quicker now, furtive. He dropped beside me behind the bush, his breathing quick. He opened the bag. Inside were 2 warm bottles of water stolen from a delivery pallet, 2 greasy, pre-wrapped sandwiches that looked like they'd been there for weeks, and, miraculously, a pair of faded, oversized jeans and a garish tourist t-shirt someone had likely left in a bathroom, stolen from a lost and found bin. It wasn't much. It was everything. We drank the water in desperate, choking gulps, the warm liquid the most exquisite thing I had ever tasted. We tore into the sandwiches, the stale bread and processed meat a feast. We were alive. But as I pulled the stolen t-shirt over my head, hiding the ruined silk dress, I understood the price of this escape. We had traded one identity for another. We were no longer who we were. We were thieves hiding in a ditch, nourished by stolen food and water, dressed in the cast-offs of others. The freedom on this side of the line was bitter, built on shame, crime, and the certain knowledge that the vast, organized world was still out there, hunting for the people we used to be. We had survived the crossing, but we had crossed into a new, precarious, and terrifying existence. We were free, but we were utterly, completely lost. The stolen clothes were a coarse, ill-fitting disguise. The jeans dragged on the ground, and the garish t-shirt, promoting a tequila brand I'd never heard of, smelled of stale sweat and cheap perfume. I was a caricature, a ghost wearing a tourist's forgotten skin. Leo looked no less absurd in his mismatched, pilfered outfit, the once proud lawyer now resembling a homeless man who had raided a donation bin. We were hidden, but we were also erased. The people we had been, Elena and Leo Sterling, were gone, their identities as burnt away as the hotel. We couldn't stay by the road. The gas station attendant would eventually notice the missing items. Every car that passed was a potential threat, every glance a potential recognition. We were free of the desert's immediacy, but now we were prey in a different kind of wilderness. "We need to move," Leo said, his voice low. The water and food had brought a flicker of sharpness back to his eyes, but it was the sharpness of a hunted thing. "We need to get off this road. Find a place to think." Think. The word was laughable. How do you think when your world has been reduced to the contents of a stolen plastic bag and the clothes on your back? Our thinking was now primal. Find shelter, find water, avoid people. We skirted the tiny town, keeping to the scrubland at its edges. The sun was high and brutal now. My bandaged foot throbbed with a hot, persistent pain. We found a dry wash, a scar in the earth hidden by a thicket of mesquite trees. It wasn't much, but it offered a sliver of shade and concealment. We crawled into the narrow space beneath the thorny branches, collapsing onto the sandy ground like wounded animals. The silence that descended was different from the tense quiet of the car. This was the silence of utter depletion. There were no more plans to make, no more borders to cross. There was only the crushing weight of what came next. Leo sat with his back against the dirt wall of the wash, his knees drawn up. He looked ancient, stripped of all his armor. The facade was gone. There was no performance left in him. "We can't go back," he said, stating the obvious into the heavy air. It wasn't the cant of impossibility, but the cant of certain death. "I know," I whispered, my voice raw. "We can't use our names," he continued, his voice a monotone. "We can't contact anyone we know. Not your sister. Not my mother. No one. They'll be watching them. It's the first thing they'll do. He was right. The tentacles of the organization he owed, and now the long arm of the law, would be wrapped around every person we had ever loved. A phone call, an email, a desperate plea for help, it would be a homing beacon straight to us. We had to become orphans, not just of our families, but of our entire past. The money, I started, the thought a desperate flicker. Gone. He cut me off, his tone final. Every account, every investment, every safety deposit box. It's either frozen or being watched. It's a trap. Anything we try to access will trigger an alert. The full, horrifying scope of our predicament settled over me. We weren't just hiding. We were starting over from absolute zero. No history, no resources, no allies. We were non-persons. So what do we do? The question was a plea, directed at the man who had caused this, the only person left in my world. He looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something akin to despair in his eyes. We work, he said, the words tasting like ash. Cash jobs. Under the table. Far from here. We keep moving. We become no one. He gestured to our stolen clothes. This is who we are now. The future stretched before me, not as a road, but as a dark, endless tunnel. A life of constant fear, of looking over our shoulders, of taking whatever miserable, back-breaking work we could find for a few dollars to survive another day. A life without friends, without family, without a home. A life where trust was a luxury we could never afford again. I looked at Leo, the stranger I was chained to. The love was dead, buried under the rubble of the hotel and the ashes of our old lives. What remained was something colder, more primal. A shared secret, a shared survival. We were accomplices. We were each other's only tether to a reality that had ceased to exist. This ditch, this hiding place, wasn't a pause. It was the first day of our new existence. We had escaped the fire, but we had been consumed by it all the same. Our old lives were erased. All that was left was the beginning of a grim, shadowy half-life, lived in the spaces between the light, forever waiting for the knock on the door, the hand on the shoulder, the moment the past finally caught up. We were alive, but we were no longer living. We were just enduring.